flip schemes are nothing new. Just look at Jerusalem, right? But more than that, so too is a misrepresentation of what considers crime and what is considered to be repression. You may not agree with the law. You can choose to deal with that the way you want to deal with that. But something happened in the mid to late 90s, and people used to be more cognizant of and acknowledge in a more honest manner. Before, I believe, they made some sort of opportunistic political buy-in to not only strip down and obscure their own history, but to sabotage future generations by giving them a completely false misrepresentation of where they come from. There used to be a time in the mid 90s when people who considered themselves to be on the left were highly critical of efforts to try to compel them to cooperate with what was understood to be unsustainable, and that was an unfolding paradigm of opportunism, attempting to misrepresent that what was actually going on as community organizing and political development was somehow the property of, or an asset of, opportunists in the Democratic Party. People knew the Democratic Party was a party started by people that supported slavery. You may not like the Republicans, but that didn't mean by default you were a Democrat. And at the time, in the mid 90s, rather than focusing on honest efforts to engage in processes of restorative justice in communities that had been disproportionately targeted through racist systematologies and criminalized or identified as being criminal, including in an effort to try to entice or extort them using drugs, that there was some effort to try to increase the social welfare penalization. You know, somebody might want to say, well, we had to negotiate with more conservative forces. That's not true. There were plenty of people in the mid 90s to late 90s that understood this as a long-term, specific, and strategic political paradigm in order to divest communities of their wealth and to pigeonhole them into a particular kind of political praxis, intending to stultify their political growth. During the Clinton administration, it was already known that before the termination of the second term of alleged President Bill Clinton, the prison complex in the country had already doubled in size. There was disproportionate sentencing, and in addition to this disproportionate sentencing, there were cultures at work within the prison system that were attempting to supplant community organizing possibilities outside of the prison complex. These were going on concurrent to changes in welfare policy that were making more and more women and children actually homeless, on the street homeless, chronically homeless. And conversations around welfare queens or people that had been put on welfare for a protracted period of time, somehow being abused of the system, didn't seem to want to take into account the fact that people at the time already understood that there was some sort of very illegal and unfair manner of consolidating resources that would enable people to get out of poverty. Wages and inflation have changed since 1998. In 1998, in the city of Chicago, $15 an hour was considered a living wage. A wage by which two people making $15 an hour at a full-time job could afford to take care of their own housing needs, their own food needs, whatever they needed in order to be able to perform their job and potentially raise children out of poverty. Now they talk about $15 being a minimum wage. Nobody talks about a living wage. I did an article at one point in time, and one of the people that I featured in that article after I interviewed him was very incensed at what was going on around these dialogues concerning welfare reform, prison industrial complex. He was very, very incensed. One of the things he said, I remember him saying it because I had to look it up. He said, who's talking about welfare reform? We didn't talk about welfare reform. We talked about guaranteed annual income. I didn't know exactly what he meant. I was young at the time. Now, conversations around guaranteed annual income seem to have some sort of misrepresentation that it has to involve Social Security or Medicare. That's completely disingenuous. And it's a complete slander. What we've seen instead is an intentional orchestration of increasing the prison industrial complex in this country in order to make a new political underclass, ripe for exploitation, that also is providing a sort of subclass of the working class, attempting to penalize people that don't have a criminal record. Just be honest. Don't mess around with these facts anymore. It is the truth, especially in the state of Texas. If you do not have a past record as an offender, they will find a way to misrepresent that you have a mental disorder. Because the intent is to put an illegal lien on you and your intangible property creation so somebody else can claim it as, I don't know, eligible for a tax exemption as part of intangible drilling cost. And in the course of this, support programs are put into effect. Presumably, maybe it has a religious basis as part of some faith-based initiative, or maybe they're just availing themselves as a political operative of one of the most lucrative markets ever expanding when it comes to criminalizing people and providing supportive services, including harm reduction services for people that have been put through the criminal justice system, including when it comes to drugs or drug addiction. And in the course of that, the economy is structured, the wage rates are structured, benefit systems are structured, healthcare is structured, housing access is structured, even possession of the body of your child is structured according to your intersection or intercession with the criminal justice system, or what they call the criminal justice system. Because we're not just talking about jail time. We're talking about lawyers. We're talking about bail bonds people. We're talking about police. We're talking about politicians. We're talking about banks that process the closeout reports on those places that provide the bail bonds. We're talking about people that take those bail bonds and use them as political leverage. Get a bail bond for us now. Get a specific coding connected to the crime you committed. Maybe later, if you have political ambition, well, we've already got a way to support you. Thank you for your contribution at this time. You know what that is? A kickback. It's an illegal kickback. When somebody in a political campaign says, risk getting arrested, knowing we're going to go ahead and pay for your bail bond, and then later on you might get a political opportunity, that's a kickback. They're setting you up for failure at the onset. And it doesn't really matter if that kickback on that bail bond is a 420 in Illinois for criminal trespassing. Oh, actually, it kind of does, right? Now we're in a situation where we are actually in a very real matter that we have to address directly. And I'm just going to say it bluntly. I have nothing against people that may have been ensnared in the prison industrial complex, even if they committed the crime and knew that they were committing the crime at the time, regardless of the justification. But to allow for and support a political paradigm that prioritizes, incentivizes, and privileges people that have gone through the prison system as if it's some sort of loyalty proving ground, and then telling other people who qualify for a job legitimately without a criminal record because they did not commit crimes that prevented them from being able to access that job, do they have to compete in some sort of priority with people who did get busted and hooked up a kickback scheme inside, or with the right person so that when they got on the outside, they could get somebody else's job, including because they were willing to take a hit when it came to wages, because they had other off-the-books alternative compensation arrangements they were willing to engage in? It says something about the kind of economy you're putting forth. It's one thing if you commit a crime, you realize you committed a crime, and then you change your life so you don't do it again. But if you commit a crime just as a buy-in to get coverage for even bigger crime later on down the line, you got to understand virtue accrues too. And this is exactly where we're at right now. This is why everything's all raced to the bottom of the barrel. They've been circulating their dirty laundry through the people of this country and around the world for a long time. We're not supposed to believe that we have the acumen to actually literally be in office ourselves. We got to make one of them happy. Maybe they'll give some token, but only if you titillate them. And you are willing to be their risk coverage because you're going to do that saucy stuff they want to get credit for when they chastise it publicly. But when it comes to actual real political gains, what do we end up with at the end of the day? We don't even have a $15 minimum wage. And we sure as hell don't have any sort of stock in the companies we're supposed to be working for. And we have our own LLC. They try to collapse it under some bullshit futures racket that they're laundering through the literal goddamn military. And you know damn well, if you got the kind of record you're thinking you're going to get away with and you try to go in the military, please. You know better. I know you know better. You would have made different choices if you actually legitimately desired to be in the military. So just be honest about it. I am not interested in a wage to the bottom race where somehow I have to go get arrested and I have to get a criminal charge on my record so that I can get a court date after I get a bail bond, and then I'll be eligible to actually work the job I trained for. And that's what they set up. And the problem is, if you're one of those people that actually got arrested and went through a course of rehabilitation and were able to get some assistance, including workforce training assistance, then you're supposed to understand that I'm your opposition. I'm your enemy. That it's my fault. Is it my white skin? I'm just saying, if there was a competitive scheme about who got busted for what, you really think that you would get busted for the same things I would? They wouldn't even give you a goddamn opportunity to get busted at that level. And I know that. And that's why I won't get busted, because that's not the kind of way we should be competing. It is a damn shame that people do not talk about how welfare reform anymore was one of the greatest crimes that was ever visited against this country. It is a great crime. Nobody talks about how the prison industrial complex was not about creating a new market opportunity for former offenders and their friends and supportive services. It's the same goddamn slavers from 150 fucking years ago flipping those goddamn bail bonds. That's what just revealed over this past weekend. And that crime is huge. That crime is huge. Even if you were wrongfully accused, even if you were set up, even if it was completely racist and contrived crime in order to try to make you a criminal as opposed to a political actor within your own community. We're talking about 150 fucking years of global reparations. I never agreed to let anybody be a fucking slave or a slaver. You don't flip that shit. You don't get to say because somebody did that to your family, well, you get to do it to somebody else's. That's the system these motherfuckers set up. That's all they would pay for. Unless we tell them we're not going to work for it.